Welcome back to the Dragon Table. This is the first episode in a series I'm going to call Why I Like, where I'm just going to grab a game off my shelf and tell you why I like it. It's not a full review, it's not a playthrough, it's not a tutorial, it's just why do I like this game? So I'm going to start with one of my old favorites, Talisman 2nd Edition. I know, it's a weird choice, but you know what? This game is near and dear to my heart. This was the first game that introduced me to some new concepts in gaming, like individual player powers, the big kind of epic fantasy trope, and being able to spend an entire weekend playing one game with some of my friends. It also started my obsession with dice, because everywhere I went to buy new expansions for this game was a place that sold dice. So you know what I did? I bought dice. So I'm going to show you real quick what the expansions are all about and a very, very brief look at how you actually play this game and what the point of it is. And then I'll tell you what I like about it. The base game of Talisman 2nd Edition was released in 1983 and included this 4-piece game board, a bunch of adventure cards, a bunch of characters, the character standees that goes with them, purchase cards, and other assorted cards, including the little chits that you use to keep track of your stats. In 1986, they came out with 2 different expansions. One is the very creatively named expansion set that included more characters, spell cards, and adventure cards. There was also the Adventure, which included more character cards, spell cards, adventure cards, the character sheets, and alternate endings. In 1987, Talisman Dungeon was released, which included the new board, the new dungeon deck, and some new character cards. Timescape came out in 1988. That also had a new board, a new deck, and more characters. Talisman City came out in 1989, and again another new board with more spells, more object cards, and more character cards, in addition to its own city deck. The next and final expansion didn't come out until 1993, and that was Dragons. And the only thing that Dragons added was a bunch of new adventure cards and new character cards. And they could pretty significantly change the game. The object of the game is to make your character as strong as possible through interactions on the board, gathering followers and objects, and having encounters, so that you can be nice and strong and head up to the Crown of Command space. If you get up there, or some alternate ending depending on if you're playing an expansion or not, and you're the last man standing, then you win the game. When you start the game, you'll be given a character out of a very large stack of possible characters. Each character has special abilities. Some are more complex than other ones. And you will also have a starting strength, a starting craft, gold, and you'll always start with 4 lives. You'll get a little standee to represent your character, and your card will tell you what your alignment is and where you start. Every character is very, very different in this game. The Warrior of Chaos just happens to be my favorite. So at its core, Talisman is a roll and move game. You roll a die, you move a certain number of spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you interact with the space where you landed. For the most part, you're going to be drawing adventure cards. There are 6 different types of adventure cards. There are events that will cause something to happen either to you, or it could even happen to everybody else that's playing the game. There are monsters that are strength monsters. And there are monsters that are craft monsters, which are casters, basically. When you're encountering a monster, you roll a die, and then you add either your strength or your craft, depending on which type of monster you're fighting. And then you may have additional magic objects or followers that can help you. The other type of cards you can draw are strangers. They can grant you boons. Sometimes you can purchase things from them. You can also encounter followers, and followers will usually join you on your quest. Sometimes you might have to fulfill a requirement for them to come with you, but usually they will just join you. And of course, you can also get objects. Tons and tons of objects in the game. You can carry 4 objects at a time unless you have something special like a mule that will let you carry more. In addition to spaces where you draw cards and interact, there are also places where you can do things like roll dice to see what happens. Like in the tavern, you can roll a die and you can have bad things happen. You can get drunk and collapse in a corner, or you could do something like have a wizard offering to teleport you to a space of your choice. So that's how movement works around the outer region. If you want to enter the middle region of the board, you have to pass through the sentinel, which requires a fight. Once you get up here, then movement happens the same way. You roll a die, you move a certain number of spaces, and you interact with those spaces. In the middle region, it's generally a little bit more dangerous, so you wouldn't go up here until you're a little bit of a stronger character. When you feel like you're ready to head towards the Crown of Command, you need to go through the Portal of Power. You have to land on this spot, pass a challenge, and move into the Plane of Peril. Once you're in the inner region, you can move 1 space at a time, either starting this way or this way, eventually getting to the Valley of Fire. In order to enter the Valley of Fire, you have to have a talisman. Ha! That's the name of the game. And from there, you'll be able to enter the Crown of Command space. Once you're in the Crown of Command space, if you're just playing the base game, every turn you're going to have a chance to roll the die to inflict damage to the other players in the game until either someone comes up to defeat you or you defeat all of them. With the expansions, there are some options for alternate things that can happen when you reach the Crown of Command space. Strength is probably the most important stat in the game, and the main way to get that is by defeating enemies and then turning them in to get increased strength points. For every 7 strength of enemy you turn in, you get 1 more strength point. If you come across a doorway card in your adventures on the main board, you can enter the dungeon. Once you go in the dungeon, you can only proceed in one direction. You roll a die and you move. If at any time you decide you want to get out of the dungeon, you can choose to flee, in which case you can then only move backwards out. If you make it all the way to the center, then you roll a die to see where you go. One of those spaces could be the Crown of Command space. Something to keep in mind if you're going through the dungeon. A timescape is a very different kind of board. If you manage to get ported to the timescape, you start at the warp gate, and when you roll a die for movement, instead of just moving a number of spaces, if you roll a 1 or 2, you move along the red line. If you roll a 3 or 4, you move along the blue line. And if you roll a 5 or 6, you move along the green line. So it can move you to all different spaces on this board. In order to leave, you have to eventually get to the vortex. And when you get to the vortex, you roll a die to see where you end up. And all of these different spaces on the board do different things. Sometimes you can draw timescape cards, and sometimes they're places where you can take actions or roll dice. In order to go into the city, you have to land on the city gate space that's added on top of the main board. And there are lots of things that you can do in the city. In a lot of spaces, you can draw cards, which would come from the city deck, and they can be places you interact with, they can be monsters, they can be more monsters, events that happen. Same kind of thing as the adventure cards, just specified for the city. There are also a bunch of different buildings you can visit. There's stables, there's a doctor's surgery, armory, the Six Fates Inn where you can gamble, the apothecary. There's a lot of different options for things that you can do in the city. And there's also a rule that you have to have gold if you're in the city. If you are in the street and you don't have gold, you could be arrested if you run into the city guard. So through the course of the game, you're going to be increasing your stats. You go up by strength, you increase your craft, maybe you get some more gold. You can't ever go above 4 lives, but if you lose some, there are chances to heal on the way. You can get objects and generally strengthen your character, maybe even picking up some followers along the way. And after about 1 to 37 hours of this, depending on how you play in the game and how the dice are rolling, someone will get to the Crown of Command, be the last person standing, and win the game. and is maybe fairly common with big games like this that are fairly expansive and have a lot of stuff going on. We throw in some house rules. One of them is that at the beginning of the game, instead of getting dealt a character at random, you get 3 characters and you can choose which one you want. I think that adds a lot to the game. Also, a little twist that we do that's special is at the 6 Fates Inn in the city, where you can go and gamble, instead of just rolling dice and seeing what happens, we use poker dice. Makes it a little bit more fun. Are there some issues with the game? Of course there are. One of the big issues is that it's very, very dependent on luck. Anytime you've got these dictating your life, then there's a lot of luck. If you roll well, landing on the right spaces, if you roll well in combat, defeating more enemies sooner, then your stats are going to go up a lot faster. Of course, there's a lot of luck in the draw too. If you're drawing really good items early, right off the bat, if you're not having a bunch of bad events happen, if you're getting good items, if you're getting monsters that you can defeat easily to increase your strength, then you're going to be doing better than everybody else. The other issue with that is it does tend to have a rich get richer kind of issue, where if you're doing that, you're getting a lot of good monsters, which increases your strength, which lets you in turn kill even stronger monsters. Then you're just going to get rolling, and sometimes it's hard for people to catch up with you. The game can also take a very long time. Look at it. Look at all of it in its glory. It can be a short game if there's a lot of good luck for one of the players. It can be a long game if no one is having good luck, and if you use an alternate ending, the alternate endings can make the game a lot longer too. There's also a gigantic advantage if you know the game. Like the way I know it, there are some details about it that I know are certain strategies that are good ways to go. There's certain ways to play particular characters. There are definitely characters that are much stronger than other ones. And it's the type of game that if you step into this with all of the expansions and you've never played it before, there's no way that I could possibly go over every rule that there is. There are just too many rules, there are too many things, so you kind of have to explain things as they come up, which is a disadvantage, obviously, if you are a new player to the game. So why do I like this game, given its few issues? Well, one of those issues is the big difference in some of the characters, and that is one of the things that I like about the game. There are so many different characters. One of the reasons we decide to give 3 cards to each person to start the game is so you don't inadvertently get dealt just one really bad character and then you can't make up for it the rest of the game. If you're being dealt 3, you have a pretty good chance of having something that's going to be a good character and not getting stuck with a centaur the whole game. Not that I have anything against centaurs in general. I'm just saying it's not the best character for this game. The other thing I like that I also said was an issue is the high degree of luck in adventure cards. But I love how many adventure cards there are. There are so many, and they're so varied. You can pull anything from a dungeon doorway to a bag of gold to an event that noms your face, followers, items, things that help you, things that are bad for you. It increases the replayability of the game for me, and it makes that next turn of the card so very interesting anytime you land on a space where you're drawing a card. That makes it fun for me. You know what else I like? Dice. I love rolling dice. Now, you don't get to roll a ton of dice in this game, like multiples, but you're rolling dice every turn. You're rolling for combat. You're often rolling for interactions with these certain spaces on the board. And even when I'm rolling badly, I still do love to roll some dice. I also think it's a nice feeling in a game when you do have good luck and you're able to build up your character and get lots of strength, get lots of abilities, followers, objects, and you start to feel super powerful, and that's a great feeling that you can get in this game. I also like that there are different ways to play. You can play this game entirely on the main board and never go off into the dungeon or the city or the timescape, but you can if you want to. And you can also change the game at the start by including these alternate ending cards. for some variety, which I don't like. So that is why I like Talisman, the Magical Quest game, 2nd edition. Thanks for visiting the Dragon Table. I will see you next time.